amount of weird Catholic shit on Earth is unfathomable to the average human mind, right? So I don't know how extensively I've talked about this. I will talk about it in the future, but I did do a master's fellowship at the Vatican Archives, which sounds fucking insane, and that's because it was the coolest thing that ever happened to me. But I got to go and study and be taught under the head archivists at the Roman State Archives, at the Vatican Archives, and they took us through, and everything they told me I can relay because I went on scholarly whatever. So they used to be called the Vatican Secret Archives up until 2008. They tried to rebrand it because Pope John Paul II in the 90s, 1998 maybe, he opened it up to scholars who wanted to come, because it's not when you think of the Vatican Archives, you might just think church records, but think about every piece of reach the Catholic Church had going from 1400 on. Think about that. There are red silk manuscript from China written in golden ink on red silk from missionaries in China that were there and wrote back to the Vatican, because when these missionaries were out doing whatever, they had to report back to the Vatican. That is why that is the biggest archive. There are over 1 million miles of documents in there, right? And I'm sure that I'm even shortchanging that. It is it's so many that they had to move it into 2 separate buildings, right? The State Archives of Rome is going to hold more of the I don't want to say political, but the state of Rome, right? Because the Vatican had reach in every, not just part of Italy, but every part of the world, the Americas, China, everywhere. So anywhere they went, that would go to the Vatican Archives, which are, in St. Peter's Basilica that we were talking about. The State Archives of Rome are actually in a building that was built originally as a church that was Borromini as well. So it was a big, beautiful church with this gorgeous amphitheater. I'll show you in shit. But so that is where most of the Roman archives are, right? And this is not going back to ancient Rome. This is in terms of modern Rome, about the 1000 AD kind of on, right? So when we're dealing with that, you also have to think about how many invasions that have happened. Particularly a really notable one. So Napoleon actually occupied the Vatican and the seat of Rome for 2 years, something like that, a handful of years, a decent period of time. He was trying to create his own universal archives, right? And there is no, you would think the singular tense of archives would be archive. Archive is the verb to archive. And archives is what it's called. I don't know. That's just what it is if you were wondering. But Napoleon wanted to create a universal archives of everywhere that he conquered, everywhere that he, his empire had its own, he wanted it to have record, he wanted to recreate the Library of Alexandria, right? As most of us do. Get in fucking line, pal. But anyway, all that happened. So over the span of those couple of years, a shitload, a metric fuck ton, right? I don't, my Italian's not great, so I don't know exactly what number they said, but it was, about a shit fuck ton of the really important records were sent over to Avignon, where the papacy used to reside. And that, interestingly enough, another weird, freaky ancestry thing. Again, this all leads back together in my hyperfixated mind. My ancestor and my best friend's ancestor, we grew up 7 minutes away from each other in the same hometown, lived, whatever. Our ancestors were both cardinals under the same pope in the Avignon papacy in 1280 something. Insane find. But anyway, I can go off on a million tangents, but all that to say, he brought Galileo's heresy trial, the big, and when we're talking about these records, dude, it's not a fucking book. You've seen what, in Lord of the Rings when Bilbo opens up and Gandalf opens up all the big ass dusty scrolls and books. That's the shit we're dealing with, right? Books were a folio, right? So a foot long and wide, and monks would sew them to get this, it's that time. So now we jump to Napoleon in the early 1800s, taking all these records that are from the 14, 15, 1600s and before. We do not have an accurate idea of what was taken or what was lost, because it is simply so much. But we know that Galileo's heresy trial was returned, all the like big stuff, and that went on for years. There was like a lot of, you know, political unrest that came with that as well. I don't know as much about that, but I do know the archival side of it. But in the state archives of Rome, where I was talking about, where it was a church built by Borromini, under Pope Alexander, I'm not sure which Pope Alexander, there've obviously been a bunch, but they created the Biblio Alexandrina, which is the little library Alexandria, and that is in the church that Borromini built that became the state archives of Rome, which is also really fucking sick. God, this library's I'm just gonna show you guys like a handful of pictures that I took. Thanks for sticking around if you have. So this is some of the pictures that I took when I was there. This is the Biblio Alexandrina. And there was a exhibit going on when I was there. It was all about authors who are like Holocaust survivors, Holocaust remembrance, children's literature. So that was a really interesting exhibit. But, you know, this sculpture was done by Borromini as well. Up here, that was the Pope himself, and it's got these like it's unbelievable. And this is the little library. You know what I'm saying? Like the scale of grandeur, you have to understand, they had no limit. There was no limitations on what they could and couldn't do, have, make. It's fucking, there's so many levels to this shit, but like I just want to appreciate the architecture. So like this is the size of the books that, you know, they're hauling back and forth, and this is really insane. This really is a treat. This is where the Vatican archives are. This is in the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. I'll show like a zoomed out picture in a second, but I'm not joking. I started like crying, like the art and architecture that I've studied all my life. The knowledge that this is the place that holds the only records of my ancestors, my, you know, because all my Cajun ancestors, the only records of them were Roman Catholic Church records. This is where they're all like it's so overwhelming, and just to even like be in the presence of this, of buildings of this magnitude with things that date back so far. Where I just was in that building was, how the hell do I get myself up there? The dome right here. I was in there, and then beneath the ground, that's where the crypts are. That's where the Vatican archives are. These are the state archives of Rome. And look at this. There's a gorgeous bell tower on top. And I took notes about why and how this was made. But this is just stuff I'm remembering off the top of my head. And like I said, the Biblia Alexandrina, very like, God, you can see like how big the stacks of books are. And then I took this picture. How insane is this? So when you walk into St. Peter's Basilica, and when I say the Vatican archives, I'm talking about St. Peter's Basilica and its archives on top and bottom. Okay, that dome, right? That is not the main dome. That is not the big one we saw from outside. There's so many secondary ones. I took like a panorama or whatever. So the floor, and then Michelangelo's Pietà, which I was breathing distance from. And I also took this photo. It was unbelievable. There was nobody else in there that day but me. It was, I mean, like, again, I'm not, you know, I don't go to Catholic church anymore, right? I have my own spiritual, you know, things, but it was a very spiritual experience to be around just art of this like magnitude, like I haven't studied every fucking inch of this, you know, not even just in school, but just because I love it and I'm fascinated with it, and now I get to, what the hell? And our tour guide said, follow me up this hill. This is a hill that just overlooks Vatican City that you can't get it. I said, where are we? He's like, well, it's for employees only. And we had to do like a big security screening. I had diplomatic immunity when I was there, which was like pretty cool. It feels like a hallucination, but it's real, and I cannot wait to write about it. And what the hell? Hello. So I haven't talked much about my trip to Rome, but I wrote a little something, and I'm going to read you a little bit of it. I wake up disoriented, nauseous, and severely confused for a moment, but no worse than any morning I had in college when I probably should have gotten my stomach pumped. I stumble across the room in pitch blackness. Glass is smudged to hell and nearly useless at this point, but I managed to fling the windows open. Old decrepit things, wood painted over so many times that the gumminess of it makes it stick to the 100-year-old wood with the heavy metal lock that latched in a way I can't comprehend with or without the jet lag. When I finally pry them open, I'm greeted with the early morning sunrise over Giancolo Hill. A real sunrise. The way I saw my sunrise at my Momo's house as a kid. Real and radiant. I'm alone overlooking the city of Rome. Sitting on the windowsill of the tiny room I've been given in the seminary. Nothing is on the walls save for the most modest crucifix I've ever seen and a painting of a saint I can't identify offhand. My immediate thought was that he was super hot for the 1500s, and the following thought was an apology that I didn't really mean. It's a barren room, cold and a little sterile, but nothing worse than my first dorm. It's a little haunting, the sheer amount of marble steps and post-Renaissance statues of icons at every turn, but the fear I should have felt was quelled by fascination. I was almost in a state of disbelief as I rested my head on the window pane. I look out at the sky, attempting to absorb as much of it as I can into my memory. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes because I have to be dreaming, but nope. It was there. Warm and rich, and holy shit, there's a rainbow too. No fucking joke. It rises and falls just over the jewel-toned houses on the hill, stretching from rooftops up into the cloudless sky. The oranges and the yellows and the ochres and the reds of the home's facades wouldn't be out of place in the French Quarter back home, and suddenly I realized just how European a city New Orleans really is. Intricate wrought iron fences adorn balconies that overlook cobblestone streets that aren't nearly wide enough for the modern crowds that traipse them. I wonder what my ancestors were doing when this city was built. I've traced them back far enough to know that the ancestors on my father's side come from Naples and Palermo, far enough off in either direction. I imagine them laboring, working with their hands in ways I now feel the urge to pay tribute to. My own shake a little bit as I remember what I'm actually doing here. It's not just a trip to the old country, it's a personal mission of preservation that I embarked on for them. With them, they whispered to me. The time comes to summon my courage and follow the Giallo brick road. Thank you. This is a thing I could talk about forever. If anybody has please ask me questions. I want to talk about this. Ask me anything, whatever, comment, whatever. So when I was there, here's how it kind of panned out. I had to write an essay. I got like an email through my grad school that was like, hey, 5 master's students are going to be selected, not just from my school. This was like a bulletin they sent out to archivist programs. I went to school for archiving in my master's degree, and they said, hey, it's the Sengali Institute of Religious Studies in Florence put it on. And they're like, hey, anybody want to apply for this? You just have to write a paper about why you would be, studying archiving, especially like if your research has to pertain to anything like Catholic records, whatever. And you guys know me, I've been researching my ancestry records, Cajun, Creole, Sicilian, all of it, Irish, all of it is Catholic records. So, and a lot of people don't know this because I didn't know this. Again, most of what I'm going to tell you, I didn't know before I went. But the missionaries, anywhere they would go, they had to report back to the Vatican. Anywhere they would go, whether it was the New World in America, whether they went to Asia, whether they went anywhere they had to write records and go back. And most of our Cajun and Creole ancestors, to a degree, particularly the Cajun ancestors, did not have anything other than the Catholic birth, death, and marriage records. So I wrote about that. I wrote about my personal research and how it's really important to me. And I got selected, and it was amazing. I did not take a second of it for granted, man. We got to go. It was amazing. I stayed in a seminary on Giancolo Hill, and it was unreal. Like, this place is a 500-year-old seminary, and it was horrifyingly creepy and simultaneously the most beautiful place I've ever been. We stayed there. I would walk down a hill with all these beautiful orange trees and little parakeets, and I've got pictures, and I'll do a whole thing, but it was unreal. And I would go across the bridge, I would walk across the Tiber River, I would walk into Vatican City, and we were at Barnabite Cathedral was where I studied, and then we would go on various tours. I stayed for a week. It was 7 full days. To the Vatican archives, the only place I didn't get to go because I got really sick. And then this is another thing, like, I'm chronically ill, and it sucks a lot sometimes because there is a full day of that excursion that I missed out on because I was physically so ill. And I tried to push through it, like, and maybe a couple years ago I would have been like, I needed to, rest, whatever. So I missed the trip to the like penitentiary archives, which was really interesting. But you know, all of that to say, I did get to see the archives of the Inquisition, which they renamed. And again, everything I'm reciting is just off the top of my head. My notebook is this thick. Archives of the Inquisition. I got to see a real. Obviously, they renamed it, and they were like, the Inquisition was bad, and it's like, great, okay, yeah, we know. And but there's like, I got to see like a uniform or like a cloak of someone who was an inquisitor. Like, it was like fucking insane. And then again, like John Paul II opened up the archives in the 90s to scholars and things like that. People who like, you know, want to further research and education. He put a lot of that forward. So for all the things about the Catholic Church, I'm not touching on anything other than the history that I've studied, because that's a can of worms for another day. However, it was remarkable. It was, I mean, genuinely, I've never been exposed to anything. Scholars, the Italians are very passionate and very excitable. I didn't realize, like, because they would show us stuff, I'd be like, oh my God. And everybody else would be like silent and like writing in their notebooks. I'm like, fuck, I don't understand social cues. But the Italians loved that. The Italians loved that people get excited. Oh, sì, look, bene, grazie. Hey. I need to sit down and film a YouTube video, and I probably will. But for now, here are some of the favorite pictures that I took on that trip. A couple of these I didn't take, just people who were with me on the trip took. Yeah, just the most. And this is in the State Archives of Rome. This is when we were up in the Duomo and the Dome, and got to look down at the altar, which this was the altar that we're looking down at. And this is the part of the Duomo that we were in that you can kind of see. This one was built by Borromini. This is a blurry one, but I had to screenshot a video. This is like a zoomed out like part of the Biblio Alexandrina. And we just went at the perfect time of year. Not one soul. This is St. Peter's Basilica. This is the square of the Vatican. There was not one person there. And this was like late January, like January 20 something. I'm going to try to censor people's faces as well, because they probably don't want their face blasted all over the place. But this is the view of the hill that we got to go up to look at the Vatican. And this is, here, I'll show you the picture that I took. This is what we were looking at. And we were like, how did we get up here? And they're like, we take you up a path. It's beautiful, bellissimo. Oh, sì, bellissima. Yeah, like literally nobody around. It was genuinely like, it was like a fever dream. But this is where I was staying, in this beautiful old seminary on Giancolo Hill up here. And there's little parakeets in the orange trees. And I would walk down in the morning. It was unbelievable. And this was the staircase, which, oh my God, it was so terrifying. But there was a teeny tiny little elevator that my suitcase did not fit into unless I was holding it up to my bosom. But I walk in and this is so haunting, but so beautiful. This is the end of my hallway. This like illuminated statue of Mary with like a glowing crown. Like, it's crazy. But this is when I went to mass and the Pope was there, and that was crazy. And these are the dead popes, by the way. Remember I said they're like entombed. Some of them are on display, some of them are not, some of them are downstairs. Again, just like the beautiful architecture is really like just unbelievably what got me. Oh, and this is a picture out my window, like the second day I was there. Are you joking? And this is where I studied most of the time. This was, if I'm not mistaken, this is the cathedral that we studied in. And this is the courtyard of where I stayed as well. I'm sorry, these are a little out of order. But the morning after this, I got to go to the Trevi Fountain. And again, like nobody was there. And a very kind lady took this picture of me. It was really great. And she was very nice. And I wish I knew her name because I wanted to be her friend. And then we're going to get into the State Archives of Rome, right? So this was, again, the Borromini courtyard. And this archivist was phenomenal. He took us like through a lot of these documents, these like illuminated manuscripts, like from the 1200s. These gorgeous, like intricately illuminated, like painted, just unbelievable. And then I was like, let me dip by the Parthenon. That'll be baller. I had no free time on this trip. And then we had to go through like this big security screening to go into the Vatican archives, obviously. That's where I got my diplomatic immunity, just as long as I was on property. But this is the parking lot, how you get to do it. And then how I talked about the archives of the Inquisition. these sketchings of the Holy Grail. This is a real uniform of like a Spanish inquisitor. This shit is like crazy. But then there were some really beautiful portraits of Mary. I really loved that one. Then we get into the old illuminated Bibles. Like obviously these are like for, you know, very well, like this is, you know, the cream of the crop basically, like things that would be like warranted being in a museum, not really like everyday objects kind of thing. But it's got this gorgeous lace like that goes all the way around the leather book. And this is what the stacks look like. These shelves, these this is unbelievable. And when I'm at work, I'm moving stuff on carts, but it doesn't look like this. These are like, not diary, but like personal, like writings, like personal paper. And then again, you can see like they've got, so like these numbers on it, that's like a record group, you know what I mean? So like if you learn about cataloging, that's kind of what this is, but these are like really old. I mean, like, Congregation of the Index. So the Congregation of the Index, was like what their, it was basically like the group of librarians. They were the record keepers. Here's some more of the gorgeous spines of the books. Like you can see how they're crumbling. Everything has to be temperature controlled because temperature humidity controlled to keep things intact. And I thought this was gorgeous. These like skulls like carved. It's all marble. And this is part of the frieze from the, if I'm not mistaken, the old St. Peter's Basilica. This is when I'm in the Vatican archives. And these are photos I'm like cleared to show you. But this is the crucifixion of St. Peter along the frieze. And I showed this in a previous video, but this is where the Vatican archives are, in the dome, in the Duomo of St. Peter's Basilica. And this is how we went down into the necropolis, into the crypts. And then we talked about, you know, the paintings on the deer skin. This was the like school schedule for like the college that was there. Like they had like medicine, law, math, and whatever, you know, like the original subjects, and you would go, and this was painted on a deer skin, and that's why you can kind of see the natural curvature of it, because it's a hide. And then here's a picture of me not paying attention to being photographed. But God, these are such intricate, gorgeous library. And I will, of course, go way more in depth. I just wanted to ramble as much as I could about this. You will hear more from me in the future because this is the size of the notebook, the notes that I took when I was there. So, we carry on. Thank you. If I may, I'd like to read you a little excerpt from something I'm writing about my trip to the Vatican archives. This is going to be a much longer project, but I thought I would read you guys a snippet. I've been working on it for a little while. So this is a part of the day where I went down into the crypts. The crypts should be frightening. Descending 40 feet underground through pitch black brick tunnels and winding staircases, tombs of various prominent ancient Roman families are illuminated, warmly but faintly behind thick panes of glass. Huge stone coffins lie inside a room carved into the brick, completely intact, startlingly normal. Where I'm standing was hidden beneath the earth before Constantine built the original St. Peter's Basilica, finished in the year 333 AD, the tour guide says. 333 is my lucky number. I gaze into the tombs, imagining what my own ancestors' tombs look like. Nothing like this, a voice tells me, and I laugh a little, despite myself. We descend lower, deeper, and darker than before. The passages we walk through are getting tighter. I've been claustrophobic all my life, but somehow I'm able to breathe down here. The heels of my boots click against the cobbled walkway under my feet, and I briefly remember that I'd only bought them a couple of days ago because the ones I packed for this trip gave me blisters. 2-day-old leather on 2,000-year-old stone. The hair on the back of my neck stands up. I can suddenly feel every vertebrae in my spine. I shake it off like a dog when it hears thunder, and I'm struck with the thought that I'm so far beneath the ground that I wouldn't be able to hear a thunderstorm if I tried. That little red light, a tour guide says, and my attention snaps back. My Adderall is wearing off, but I'm fighting to come down. Just in that passage, can you see it? She asks, and I stand up on my tiptoes to look at it. Just across from me, nestled in the deep black brick, is a cutout the size of a small window. It's about the width of a bottle, I note, or an urn. Within the opening, there is a gleaming red light. I'm drawn to it like a moth, trying desperately to search inside for something, anything, but it's empty. And curiously, I look up again just to hear our guide. The red light, she notes, indicates the place St. Peter's remains were found. I'm silent for a long while as she explains that they were excavated in the early 1940s, and archaeologists discovered the tomb's location through ancient graffiti that was scratched into the walls, descending through the crypts. I'm silent for a long while as she explains they were excavated in the early 1940s, and archaeologists discovered the tomb's location through ancient graffiti that was scratched into the walls, descending through the crypts. Proclamations of "I'm with Peter" or "Peter lies here" were etched into the stone like breadcrumbs, and they followed it directly into the source. I'm still attempting to process just exactly where on earth I'm standing while I hear her talk about the verification of the remains. I find myself tearfully staring into the gaping earth where the remains are no longer even kept, like Cameron staring into that Seurat painting in Ferris Bueller. Art and history evoke the same feelings in me. Like when you see a painting you're enraptured by and your mind's eye lights up, but you can't quite come up with the words for it. It's a feeling energetically. It's a feeling in your neurons that you can't explain away. The feeling overtakes me as I stand face to face with the tomb of the first pope, and my eyes are level with the place his urn would lay. I'm rendered speechless, thoughtless, which is a first. I sit with this feeling, and I'm uncomfortable. For a moment, I'm angry, for reasons anyone would be. I'm angry because I wonder why my loved ones had to suffer so much. I wonder why these tragedies happen every day. I wonder, why did we have to suffer through Katrina? Why do these innocent children have to keep dying? Why? God damn. And then I stop breathing, and not even the tour guide speaks. And I summon my courage, and I straighten my spine. And even though I'm suddenly stricken with fear, I stand at the tomb of St. Peter half defiant. I don't know what the other half is, but this half is angry. This half is afraid. This half is desperate and confused. And this half begs, why do you let me suffer when everyone tells me you love me? A jolt shoots up my spine. Why have I had to suffer so much? My personal struggles are an afterthought here. How could you love me and let me hurt? I'm not alone in here. I'm surrounded by 15 others in the group. Kind people, intelligent people, good people. People I wouldn't want to feel in front of. So I hold it in. I grit my teeth and I cross myself. Head, chest, shoulder, amen. Just like they taught me in Sunday school. I remember being young in bits and pieces, but I remember the good feelings the most. I look into the empty tomb again and a resigned tear falls down my cheek. I don't hate you, I think. I fear you. I feel another shiver across my shoulders, like the one that shot up my spine. This one's warmer, though, and I don't fear this one. In the same strange way, I don't fear this tight space that I'm cramped in. I feel years of tension release from my shoulders. I can't explain it. It's like marionette strings were cut. I feel like I just finished running a marathon. I haven't moved, but it's like all the fear and the anger in my body bursts. I don't know why, and I don't know how, but I relax. I was neurotic as a 6-year-old in Catholic school. Sitting in church, I was anxious in the pews, and I mentally rehearsed stand, sit, kneel, sing, sit, stand, communion, kneel, until the words lost all meaning. And that's called semantic satiation, if you were curious. And that's written in parentheses. I tried to keep everything in line. I tried to keep every thought in line, because God hears everything in your head, and he knows when you're misbehaving. The concept of omnipotence doesn't fare super great in the mind of a glorified toddler with OCD, for those wondering. Even then, I had never felt comfortable with blind faith, blind trust, blind anything. I used to ask my Sunday school teacher if there were fossil records to corroborate the timeline of Noah's Ark. As comical as that image is, I realize at this moment that maybe this mindset is what led me here. If one half of me is defiant, the other half is insatiable, starving to know why. Life isn't fair, and none of this is fair. And it hurts, and it hurts, and it hurts. And the only thing that can give me any sense of certainty, and I've always felt it in my gut, is that the world must exist in balance. If I can't let myself have blind faith that everything will be okay, I'll let myself have the understanding of karma, of yin and yang, and of bittersweetness. I also have the understanding that I will never be satisfied. I will always be searching. Like right now, I'm searching through the darkness of St. Peter's humble tomb, and I see that warm red flash, and I feel the heat of it in my chest. I imagine Peter. I imagine a fisherman 2,000 years ago. My papa is a fisherman. He used to take me catfishing down in the bayou by their old house before Katrina. I remember him teaching me how to reel them in and how he learned from everyone else who came before him. And I remember that feeling of peace, that feeling of a loving grandfather. I remember what he gave up for my grandmother and then my mother, and then me. And I imagine him being here beside me. I imagine being 6 years old again, and I imagine him holding me here. I got you, he'd say, hitching me up on his back. I ain't gonna let you fall. He never did. A real tear falls down when I don't hold back. I perform the sign of the cross again, but it feels more sincere this time. Less obligatory. More honorific. Head, chest, shoulder, shoulder. I move to kiss the tips of the fingers that I crossed myself with, and I taste the salt of my tear. I believe you.
Is beauty all that matters to you?
I had a vision.
It is... It's not as, like, crazy secretive, like, you know, National Treasure 2, conspiracy free. It's not like that. The shit that I saw, but that's more than people have seen in thousands of years, so you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, archives are just giant libraries. It's just all the shit that's ever been collected. And working in an archives is like, you know, just doing that. It's paperwork, you know, like to you know, in a macro lens or whatever. It's really cool. It is spooky only in the sense that, like, there are so many dead popes under there. And a lot of them are on display. I am a freaky little weirdo. Again, I love that Memento Mori type shit. So I was super inclined to go see every single dead pope. Dead Pope Society. That's whatever. I had a great time. I have so many photos. I have like 1,000 photos to show. It feels like I made it all up in my head, and if I did, that would be easier to explain. Yeah, so basically, like, underneath St. Peter's Basilica, when you're in there, like, it's a giant graveyard, basically, right? Like, so, like, at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom is, like, these, like, ancient Roman graves, and they're, I don't know, 3,000 BC. They're old, and, like, they're old, and, so they've been there. And then above that is where all the popes are buried in the crypts. A lot of them have their bodies on display, like variously, like throughout, because it's the bones and body parts and clothing and items that once belonged to a saint or a pope or whatever. Those are called relics, right? Now, I'm not Catholic anymore. I grew up Catholic, but I'm just a nerd for history and shit. So I just kind of know this kind of stuff. Like, I saw a relic, like, and yes, it's as weird as it sounds. It's just like a gilded bone, like covered in jewels and stuff. Like this, I swear, this is why the Protestant Reformation happened, because they were like, hey, we're dipping bones in gold. Can't do that. And the Pope was like, are you, like, so fucking serious? This is, like, what we do. And then that's the Protestant Reformation, basically. But I did see Mary Magdalene's foot bone, and I did weep. I don't know. But, yeah, so, like, there's that, and then there's, like, the catacombs, which are, like, Roman catacombs. I didn't get to go, because it was, like, below freezing when I was there, and I was like, no. But I did get to go down. I got to see where St. Peter was buried. I made a video about that earlier, which was really fucking cool. Yeah, they do a lot of weird shit down there. So I'll say a couple of things. A really amazing thing happened. This was not like a document that I saw when I was there, but I'll give you another one in a second. I went, with the research purpose of finding, documents and records of my Cajun and Acadian and so forth, ancestors who were predominantly Catholic, French Catholic, and a lot of records have been lost in a Louisiana sense. There are a lot of records that remain in Nova Scotia and things like that. Where the first part of the diaspora happened after the first genocide, and then the second genocide led us to Louisiana. And there's a lot that was lost in Katrina. There's a lot that was lost in great floods before, in the 20s, things like that. So a lot of the records of, and then of course I had a lot of enslaved ancestors and indigenous ancestors. And so the only real people that were coming around in the area of South Louisiana to take, notes of like who was born, died, baptized were the missionaries, and they relayed so much information back to the Vatican, right? So when I was there, my scope of study at the time was records of, French Catholic refugees that were living in the Nova Scotia Islands who ended up marrying in with the Mi'kmaq tribe. And so that is around the time of like 1650 to like 1750. Around the 1750s is when the second genocide, ethnic cleansing happened. Le Grand Dérangement, the Great Diaspora that led us to Louisiana. The professor that was leading that fellowship had written a book about missionaries that had written back about peoples in the Nova Scotia islands in Canada. So that's my ancestors. So that was an incredible resource to find. And then on top of that, if there was like a document that was really cool, I saw a handwritten document, like letter from Michelangelo to the Pope, to the Pope, excuse me. And I've talked about this in another video earlier, like extensively, but that one I would say like was really cool because he was like, I don't even have to finish working on the Sistine Chapel. I don't even have to do any of this. I'm famous. I can go home. I'm going back to Florence. And then the Pope was like, okay, guards, seize him, whatever. That was really cool to see in person. And I saw a lot of really gorgeous, just the paintings and the sculptures that I got to see were like overwhelming, because the archives also hold art and sculpture and things like that as well. So that was really cool. Thank you. I literally went through all my notes, typed them up, and what I've been doing as like a researcher, because I read this book, Archiving the Artist, and I thought it was a very interesting read, talking about how a lot of artists destroy or get rid of their like sketches and their early drafts of manuscripts and all kinds of things, and then we don't have like kind of the process. And that was really interesting to me, especially in a digital age, which they touched on as well. Like, I'm using a Google Doc and I'm just editing over it. So what I decided to do with this project is I hand wrote everything in a notebook because it was just easier to do that when I was going from place to place on the trip. So I went through, and this year, well, because I went in January of last year, the end of last year, I went through, I typed up all these notes, I saved that as one Google Doc, I duplicated it, and then I went in and I did all my suggestions and comments, duplicated that, edited my stuff, duplicated that, and then went in and made it different, so like all of these have their own, and then they have their own metadata, so like when it was made, what I titled it, like all this stuff, where it was saved, all things like this, hyperlinks that I used, everything, it's contained, and nothing's really lost. And then you back everything up to like your hard drive or whatever, like a thumb drive. That's also very important because the internet could go to, you just have to have like backup copies. But I went through and then I put everything into like a timeline. I went through and I made like a timeline. I made a separate document of all the definitions of like, acronyms that I learned or whatever, things that I learned, like translations. So I don't even know how to begin to unpack this fucking information. I just want to relay it and teach it and give access to it on a larger scale because it's the coolest shit ever. Because it's not even like just religious stuff, it's like history. It's so many levels of history because they were like the giant library of the world.
Hours to get slapped in the face in front of the dead Pope. I didn't even get to have a moment with him.
This kind of happened to me almost verbatim because when I went on my fellowship in Italy and I was studying at the Vatican archives, I went to mass at the Vatican, but I didn't realize it was day for mass. I was just going because I thought it was just, I had jet lag and I had been asleep for like a day and a half, and I didn't realize it was a Sunday morning, and it was in January. It was after Christmas and all that jazz. And so I went and I walked in because I wanted to go see the Michelangelo statues, the Pietà. And I walked in and I was like, man, there's a lot of people in here. And I was like, oh my God, it's a Sunday. And then I realized it was a Latin mass. And I don't think I've been to a Latin mass since I was 5 years old. We used to have Italian mass at my church when I was little. I went to Mater Dolorosa, Mother of Sorrows. That's not a joke. It was an Italian Catholic school. That's not a joke. Anyway, so I go in there and I was like, well, I might as well find a seat. Oh, wow, let me go sit by this pretty thing. It's the entrance to St. Peter's tomb. And I was like, oh my God. And and then I hear and then I hear gasps and I turn my head. It's who do I see? Papa Francesco in his wheelchair. I'm not joking. That's the Pope. That's Papa Francesco. And under here is where St. Peter is buried. And under all of that, come back. And under all of that is the original St. Peter's Basilica built around the time of, okay. So this is the one that was built. I'm sick of. I'm so glad you asked this question because oddly enough, that's one of the things that really interested me. So okay. I work in an archives right now. The smell of old books smells like old books, right? When I was there, it smelled like holy water and old books, right? And if you did not grow up around Catholic stuff, it was very understandable. If you did not, I'm not. And everything I discussed, this has no bearing on religion and personal faith. I'm a historian in this sense, and I just want to relay everything I learned. When I was there, the earliest books that they had, the earliest artifacts that they had paper and parchment were dating back to 800 AD. So, and a lot of that was on animal skin, painted deer skin, because a lot of it would be hung up or, on display. And then the elements would destroy paper a lot easier. So if they put it on an animal skin, obviously it would weather the elements a lot better. It doesn't smell if you tan a hide, it doesn't smell like anything like an animal or whatever. Just the books were really that old book smell, man. I'm a sensory person. And it's shocking that I didn't have any sensory overload or meltdowns when I was there. And I'm not being facetious. Sensory overload and overstimulation really, really hit me really hard. But when I was there, I went in and it smelled like old marble and holy water. And you're just kind of struck with I hadn't really smelled anything like that since I was a child, because I've been to church in years, except for, weddings and funerals, whatever. But that smell is very striking. The incense kind of wafted from the church up, obviously. And I bought some incense. I know I was talking shit about the Vatican having a gift shop, but I have family members that were like, if you don't fucking buy me something, I'm gonna lose my shit. So I was like, all right. So it really it was like a museum. It is a museum in a lot of senses. Everything is made of marble. Everything is a mosaic. Everything is a fresco. Everything is you feel electricity in there, and a lot of people don't believe in energies or whatever, and that's neither here nor there. When I went to Greece, and again, I talk about these things and it sounds extremely privileged, and it is, because it's really awesome that I got to do these things. I'm very grateful for it. When I went to Greece, I went into an old church that was like a temple, thousands of years ago, and then it became a Greek Orthodox church. Again, small, not one of the cathedral. This was a church, a temple, like the people in the community would go to, smaller than my bedroom. And we went in, and you get goosebumps top to bottom. One of my friends at the time who I was with was didn't really believe in anything, but he was like, man, you come into a place where people have given all their good wishes and given all their hope and faith in one place for thousands of years. How do you not feel a little oh shit, and especially that, because these archives are meticulous. Most archives now base their shit off of their schematics off of how the Vatican archives kind of hold their shit, because it is so unbelievably huge, right? And the amount of shit that I work with at work is huge. To that is nothing. That is your personal bookshelf. in comparison to the shit that they have. Now you're talking my language. I fucking loved the necropolis. I loved the necropolis. It was insane. And okay, so when we were talking earlier about like all the graves and stuff, like those super like, okay, Romans had like wealthy Romans had those big ass graves. It was like with like it was open, and it was like like it was decorated like a house. You know what I mean? Like for the afterlife. There you go. Bing, bang, boom. And so that was there. And I said in another video that they didn't know St. Peter's remains were under there. What I meant was there was no like scientific proof at the time, right? It was built there for the religious faithful reason that this is where St. Peter died and was buried and such and so forth. So that original St. Peter's Basilica, built 333 AD, was quite literally built on top of that Roman like necropolis, the city of the dead. That's quite literally what it is. And so from there, there are where all the popes are buried. Like just and again, it like because when we think of cemeteries, and if you're not from Louisiana, you think of a tombstone sticking out of the ground. If you're from Louisiana, you're thinking great, beautiful, gorgeous mausoleums. That's more where we're at. But where ours are like stone and stuff, theirs are like gilded, and you can see inside them, right? It's like a glass panel. And a lot of them are on display in St. Peter's Basilica, but these ones are like just, out, and they're like obviously behind velvet ropes and whatever, and it's like, Gregory the whatever. There's so many of them. It's too much. But you can go and see, they're like not mummified, but like their bodies are like, like the bones are like like there's like netting around it, and they're like, obviously covered in gold and jewels. And again, when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, they're like, why are we spending our fucking money on this? And they're like, because it's the popes. And they're like, yeah, but like people are dying. And they're like, okay, I don't care, so it's kind of like that. But then like they found, in the 50s and 60s, St. Peter's remains down there. It is, and then you go up, and on top of all that is the St. Peter's Basilica that was built in the 1600s. It's unbelievable the levels to this, but it's like, and then to an American on top of that, like our country's what, 300 years old, and like as a, what I mean. The land is much older than that. You understand what I'm saying? I'm talking about, paperwork. I can't fathom, and I went to school for trying to fathom large amounts of documents. It's like, and like, okay, so like when Christopher Nolan was like, I made an IMAX, and it weighs 1 million pounds, and it's 1 million miles long. And you're like, whatever that means. Like, I know what a movie is, but like, whatever that means. It's that same thing. It's wild. I got to speak to one of the like head archivists who was like, was it the Jesuit order? The Jesuits took meticulous records. He may have been in the Jesuit order, but he was like, I've never seen everything here. Like he's like, it is just, it's not like I could spend my whole life there just digging through stuff and still not see everything. Did I get to handle anything? I got to hold some book, like, like things that were safe for, scholars and archivists to handle. So that was really amazing. There was my favorite thing that I saw. Oh my God, I get goosebumps. There was a letter of parchment from Michelangelo to Pope Julius, basically being like, you're not paying me enough. I don't even want to paint this place. It sucks. I'm literally famous. I can go back home. Like, I'm going to go live with my dad. Like, I'm going to be a sculptor. Like, this is bullshit. He signed and dated that letter on my birthday. February 18th. It's coming up. Last day of Aquarius season. It was so, I didn't get to physically touch that one. It was very, like, crumbling, obviously. So, but there were, like, old Bibles, like the leather books. We got to, it was so cool. I did also get to see a column, from, the time of Constantine. It was like the base of like a stone column. Yeah, oh my God, it was fucking crazy. That is exactly what I went for. I'm so glad you brought this up, because and you guys have heard me talk about my Cajun ancestors on here, right? They were colonized 1,000 times over, and the only remnants I have of them are those Catholic records, right? So I learned, it was really cool. I learned how to use the databases, right? The people that the archivists that I studied under were like brilliant scholars, like genuinely like really incredible. So they're as passionate as I am about public access to things. This was like a scholarly trip, like this is their understanding of like what harmful practices happened in the past. You can't just move on from them, but you need to have access to them to go back and understand what was wrong, what proof of these things, you know what I'm saying? So I fully, that's where I want my research to lead me. I mean, like, it's already led me there, but I want to deeper understand these colonial times and like what, like again, we can learn so much about our own people who were colonized through these records that we just didn't have access to. No, literally, like, and obviously I didn't take any pictures of the guards, but you could Google like the papal guards, like it's like these regal like outfit. I was like kind of laughing. No, I wasn't laughing, but it's absurd to a bitch like me to be. What am I doing there? You know what I mean? Like, every ancestor I've ever had was a peasant or an indentured servant. You know what I mean? Like, it just felt like I'm up in here. You know what I mean? And then the square is always like very full. Like to be like the only person there, it felt like, I don't know. I was like, all right, pour one out for my grandmamas who always had that rosary moving, man. We got the whole square to ourselves, Graham. Look at that. That felt it was bizarre. I don't even know how to explain like the feeling that I had. Like because I am not religious, right? Like, I don't subscribe to religion. I grew up Catholic and went to gospel church on the weekends, right? And this is neither here nor there. I have my, personal spiritual things now that, quite frankly, are nobody else's business. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I operate. But I always struggled really hard with structured religion for various reasons. And I know that's a common, especially growing up queer in the South, things were difficult for me. But I am a historian at the end of the day, right? I am an archivist. My career position, I am an archives tech. But in my life, I am an archivist, in my personal studies. And especially as someone who just loves art, architecture, history, like things like that, to be in the presence of it virtually alone. It was like the morning that I went to St. Peter's and I got to see the Pietà, and there was nobody in there. Literally me, a security guard, a couple of nuns at the kneelers. Like, I was alone. And it felt like, I don't know, I'm getting goosebumps, man. Because, like, I just think about how important it was to my ancestors, my grandmothers, like, before me. You know what I mean? And, like, how much they suffered, how much they were put through, and how much they must have prayed, And so to be there, like, not to say little old me, but like what? Like I'm a bartender. I know that my career has shifted, but in my head, I'm just a bartender, and I'm a nerd, So it's very like emotionally heavy to have gone, and especially like. I think about all the women in my family who were never educated. I think about all the men in my family who were never educated. I think about the people in my family who went to school and had the language physically beaten out of them and humiliated out of them. And then for me to like go and pursue higher education as a woman who didn't grow up with a lot, like it felt it felt full circle, you know what I mean? And especially like as someone who's just really passionate, like I said, I want public access to knowledge and information because like it's hard to go and find these resources if you don't give a shit about it. Like, you know, if you're not crazy for it, like it's very difficult to find a lot of this information. And people deserve to know about it. And I'm really proud of what I got to do, and I'm really grateful that I got to do it. And I can't wait to tell you guys about it. I wish so badly that because I just moved into a new apartment. I wish I had my books with me. They're in my old place. But I have a book all about like the holy relics in the Catholic Church. Literally, like this is what prompted the Protestant Reformation. They were like, hey, are we actually dipping bones in gold and every jewel we can find and like putting them up on the altar? And like, you know, like it's bizarre. Just literally just Google reliquaries. I'll go more into depth in this later. It's crazy. So they do and they are, but it's just such a difficult process. Like they started over COVID. When quarantine started, like a lot of institutions did. But it was just so, they're like, they don't have the manpower, they don't have enough bodies to do it. B, you have to be cleared in so many ways and have so many years of archival experience because it's not just like, you know, me working at a random, you know, place and being like, okay, these are our, you know, I'm archiving sales records and things like that, like of the business. That's one thing. You have to be trained in how to handle 1,000-year-old documents. You know what I mean? Like it's just, and the equipment that you have to have is so expensive and really inaccessible. And like, yes, the Catholic Church has so much money, but these are scholars. You know what I mean? Like, grants have to be given for certain things. So, and even if it was funded, how many people are able to do it, you know? So that's an even deeper conversation, about digital archiving as a whole, which is why like my like area of study in particular was digitization, digital archiving. And I studied under a phenomenal professor, who like literally wrote the book on digital archiving and archiving in general. He's so cool. So I was really fortunate to be able to learn about that, but it is just such a massive undertaking. Okay. So like, my journal here, right? If I were to go through and like not only like scan every single page, like, right, then I have to go through into a database. Well, first I have to go into a spreadsheet and I put all the information in the spreadsheet. But someone then has to go and transcribe what was scanned on those images because you can't control F handwriting. And then also the way that language was used is like you have to be proficient in paleography of the time, which is like how people wrote shit in like the 1400s or whatever. You have to understand that, you know, they told time differently. Like it's a billion qualifications that you have to have, and it's just not like accessible. There's like plans in the future for it to happen. It would be really cool if it could happen sooner rather than later, but like, you know, again, like it's just about needing the manpower. So basically, the St. Peter's Basilica that we know and love today, built by Bernini and Borromini? No, not Bernini. Borromini. Anyway, and Michelangelo was working on the Sistine Chapel and shit. They fought. That's who punched Michelangelo in the face and busted his nose, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, all that to say, it was built on top of the remnants of the original St. Peter's Basilica, that was created by Constantine, around 300 AD. It's actually 333 AD was around the time that they built it, because that's my lucky number. Anyway, so on top of that, that was where Pope Julius had them build the new St. Peter's Basilica, and they did not know at the time that it well, in the 1600s, they did not know that it was a like giant like underground Roman very exquisite like burial cave Really, really huge down in those crypts, like immaculate, like wall to wall, beautiful graves. So that was like, I mean, like 1,000,000 feet below ground because it's 3,000-year-old graves. Anyway, they didn't know that St. Peter's remains were buried under there until like the 50s or 60s when a bunch of archaeologists were going in and they were like excavating further because they knew there were these graves now. So they're going and they find this very simple urn, like very small and like a weird little hole in a brick wall. And the reason they found it was because there was graffiti in Greek, kind of like dating back to the time, like around 30 years after Christ died, which would have been around the time that St. Peter was crucified. Anyway, and so they were like, there was a bunch of graffiti in Greek that was like, Peter was here. I'm with Peter. I love Peter. And they're like, what the fuck? Like literally like Peter was here type graffiti. And so they're like, well, you're gonna keep going and figure this out. They found that little urn, like a little urn in the wall with his remains, and then they brought it up. I don't know who was the Pope in the 60s. It wasn't John Paul I. It's completely inconsequential. They took scientists and all kind of stuff. They couldn't carbon date the small remains that were left because then if it ended up being a saint and then you destroyed some remnant of that, that's severely sacrilegious, and then that, that's a whole thing that the Pope can't really fuck with. But anyway, it was determined around the 50s and 60s that those were the remains of the first Pope, St. Peter, which is fucking crazy. So that was a little hole in the wall. Now, like, when I got to go down to the crypts and everything, which was the coolest part because I love dead stuff, okay? I'm a little freakazoid. I wanted to go down to the catacombs, but it was like below freezing, and I don't fuck with that. Anyway, so there's like a black brick wall with like a little glowing light, like a red light with like a hole in the wall, and you go and you look and they're like, that's where St. Peter's remains were discovered. It's phenomenal. It's fascinating. And I'm like writing down everything. I took like a book of notes like this thick, just shit that I learned there that was so fucking baller. Anyway, that's where I was going with that. I'm not joking. I was so anxious because I have no impulse control that my hands were so deep in my coat pockets. I was like giving myself a hunch because I was like, I am so excitable that my body is like already moving before I tell it no. So I was like obsessive compulsively like doing my finger tapping, you know what I mean? I was like, don't. It's like 1,000-year-old marble. I bet it would feel really cool. I bet it smells really good too. You should probably go sniff it. You should probably go right up to it. Stop it up there. Because when I say archives of the Inquisition, it is the archives of every record of the Inquisitions, like not the Roman Inquisition and the Spanish Inquisition, and then later they changed it to like for the archives for the Congregation of the Faith or whatever. You know what I mean? But it's all like Galileo's heresy trial. Obviously court reporters take down the myth. That's just what it was. So yeah, Galileo did this. Napoleon stole that one, brought it to Avignon, where it stayed for years, and they had to like get it back and all that jazz. But everything that was, justified in the Holy Crusades, was in the archives of the Inquisition. Because there's the archives of the Inquisition, and then the archives of the Index, the Congregation of the Index. They are archives. Congregation of the Index was like the record keepers, the librarians, the archivists of the time, like monks and stuff. The ones who would like take all the minutes of everything and write down the, like all the decrees and what have you. Because again, we talk about the papal states, like these, with the Pope as the monarch, like it was its own government, it's its own operating country entity. Oh my God, so much. I just got the like scholars tour of it. Like I just got, and it's like millions of millions of books and documents and things. So like even if I just like open a random book, I wouldn't necessarily be able to like read or understand it. But I'm sure, like the remains of St. Peter are held within the Vatican, and that's well known. And somebody said like about, and that statistic, like museums only show about 0.5% of their holdings, just for many reasons. Space, not copyright, but certain things that do not have permission from the estate to be on display, but you do have the right to have it in your holdings, and people can come and get scholarly access to it and such and so forth. But like the average person wouldn't be able to just go and get it or see it or whatever. I don't even know I barely know what I did see, let alone what I didn't see. And again, like the only thing I'm genuinely talking about is how fascinating this was from an archival standpoint, from a research standpoint, because at the end of the day, I am an archives tech, and I do archival work. I love to know. I mean, we're the biggest archive in the world. How does it run? What are the schematics? What do they hold? Like, who donates to things to there? Because there's a lot of donated collectors. What collections were stolen? Obviously, it's like there's the British Museum. Layers upon layers upon layers to this. At the end of the day, I am a historian. I am someone who is passionate about public access to scholarly information, to research that benefits, everyone. I understand that there are higher powers than me that dictate what is visible and what is not visible, and what is classified and what is personal and what is not considered a record, and things like that. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't even know how to begin unpacking the things that I did see and take notes about. You know what I mean? If there are any questions, like at all, that you guys have about my trip to study and present my research at the Vatican Archives, an insane sentence to say, I know that. Please comment. I want to know, like, it feels so fun to be able to like relay what I've learned, because I love history. I love to nerd out, and I just appreciate you guys nerding out with me. So they are broken down like several different ways. Like there's different, like, okay, so there's the state archives of Rome, and then the all of this is kind of under the umbrella of the Vatican archives, except for the state archives of Rome is like kind of its own entity. But then within the Vatican archives, you're going to have the Congregation of the Index, which is an archives of all the records kept, like from God, I don't know the year off the top of my head, but I have it written down somewhere. But all of the record keeping was the Congregation of the Index, and then there was the Congregation of the Inquisition, which I posted about a few minutes ago, and this was an archives that documented everything about the Inquisition. And actually, the reason the Congregation of the Index was created was to be a list, like keep track of all the banned books, to keep track of everything that was heretical, to keep track of, they had separate archives within the archives. But nowadays it's kind of done like, like any, not to say any other archival schematic, and that sounds like the dweebiest shit ever. It's because it is. So like when you're archiving, you have like a collection, right? That's a big group of stuff. So like, okay, so we're just going to talk about the archive of the State Archives of Rome, right? Everything that was in there, under say like records of different governors and people in politics at the time. So that is the collection, like the political collection. Within that, there's going to be record groups, like, things from individuals, like, individuals who were holding political power and whatever. So that is going to be broken down further into like what type of thing it is. If it's a book, if it's a scroll, if it's a piece of parchment, if it's a piece of art, if it's, so they basically have to go like big Venn diagram, little Venn diagram, little Venn diagram, little Venn diagram. So I would say semi-confidently that most archives today kind of model their, like organizational pattern, because how do you keep it running so efficiently? You have to have it broken down into smaller subsections, basically. I know this was not the best explanation, but in a nutshell, that's kind of how it's set up. Thank you. Like, to me, nothing like lights me up like learning something new that I'm passionate about or I'm interested in, or that I could relay in an interesting way, or that I could share with people that I care about because I know that they would find it interesting. Like, and again, I grew up queer in the South. I have my own struggles with organized religion, but for me, spiritually, what fulfills me spiritually is learning new things. And it's as silly and, whatever as it sounds, there's nothing more exciting than when like that light bulb goes off, you know what I mean? So I have a bunch of longer videos about this. I put them in my archiving stuff playlist, so that will be very helpful. But in a nutshell, I got my undergrad in English from Southeastern University in Louisiana, and then I got my master's in library and information science is the degree, but my concentration was archiving and preservation. And then within that, I studied in particular digitization, like digital preservation. And then when I was in grad school, I graduated May of last year. When I was in grad school, I got like an email bulletin, this was through the Sengali Institute of Religious Studies in Florence. It's like they have they're very into archiving over there. And so I wrote an essay, because you had to write an essay if you were in school, like a master's, postdoctorate, whatever, because they had 5 slots and that were mostly paid for. I genuinely did not pay that much for it. I paid 20 euros a night to sleep in the seminary, which was an amazing deal. Very kind. The priests there were very kind. It's like a very old institution. And they were like, they knew a lot about the study. Obviously it's a seminary, but all this to say, when I was there, it was like a fellowship before I completed my master's. So I went in that January of last year, graduated in May of that year. And then now I work at the National Archives in DC. It's pretty awesome. I very much enjoy it. I'll explain more in depth about that as well when I have more information. But none of this was done in a professional capacity. This was just done when I was a student. Art history is like a great base for archival studies. I did English. Humanities are a great base to have. Social sciences, things like that. If you enjoy it, I can't recommend it enough. And thank you. I'm very, very glad you guys are enjoying this. I sincerely really appreciate it. I was genuinely shocked that we got to go down into the necropolis. I knew that the body of St. Peter, the remains of St. Peter in an urn had been discovered 50s or 60s. I didn't think that I was going to get to see that. It was like a black stone wall, like a small cutout. I mean, like, yay big and yay wide, and it had a glowing red light in it. And that was like the symbolic of where the urn with his ashes was found. And like it, like because like these were real people, these were real historical figures, and to see that next to, or like on the same necropolis as like these like beautifully, immaculately created ancient Roman graves of the super wealthy like families of Rome, of ancient Rome. And you, like, I'm there and like I'm severely claustrophobic, okay? Tight spaces, I don't like it. It freaks me out severely, like panic attacks. It was a very tight space to go all the way down and in. Some people didn't go. Obviously, it's so claustrophobic. But I was like, I gotta give it a shot. Like, what am I gotta just hold my breath and then do it. I did not feel claustrophobic at all. It was like absorbing the history that is there. And then especially, I just, that was really overwhelming. And again, I got to see Michelangelo's skull. I got to see things that I dreamt about seeing my whole life. Like, since I was a child, I've just been obsessed with art, architecture, especially the Renaissance era. And I grew up in church. I grew up hearing all these stories all the time. St. Peter, are you joking? Like that, that was really overwhelming. And I tried to like only look at this from a scholarly experience, like point of view. But there's so much of it that emotionally really impacted me. So that was like, I did not expect to feel that way at all. I'm sorry that my washing machine is the loudest thing in the whole world. I know. It sounds fucking absurd. And you know what sounds fucking absurd? I'll tell you the exact date and time that I found out that I was going to this, because I had to write an essay to apply to go, because there was only 5 spots, and I got to stay in a seminary. It was fucking crazy. Anyway, my grandfather had died. His birthday is November 11th, 11/11. I associate that with my grandfather. He died on my grandmother's birthday, and she's been passed for several years. And he died on her birthday. And we were going to the funeral the next morning, and it was 12/2/22 was the date. And then at 11:11 a.m., this sounds like bullshit. It sounds like I'm fucking making up. 11:11 a.m. I get you've been accepted for the like I don't know, man. It sounds fucking fake, and you guys know me. I know I'm not stupid usually, but I feel like I have to write a book or something. Like, if I made this up, I would get pissed at myself, because it's like, yeah, okay. The 2 halves of my brain were going fucking crazy, because, like, yes, I understand this is an incredibly fragile, ancient document, but at the same time, Michelangelo touched this, and it's right here, and my body's next to, you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy to be, like, such a nerd about this stuff, and then, like, be next to it, and, like, maybe I'm a little off my rocker, but I think that's what makes me such a good researcher, because who else is gonna be like, what does this smell like? I have to know. I was shocked I hadn't gotten any comments like this before, but I did not study under anything. I went as an independent student, as an independent scholar, to research the archival schematics of the Vatican archives, which hold the documents and records of my ethnically cleansed ancestors who went through at least 2 genocides in the last 400 or 500 years. It feels pretty good to be able to go in as someone who wants to learn and wants to do good things. I'm not the Pope. You know what I mean? Because when you're a scholar and you're like going out doing stuff, sometimes it's easier to say like scholarly stuff. But technically, I was a postgraduate research fellow through the Sangali Institute for Religious Studies in Florence, who studied as a research fellow at the Vatican Archives. I had my personal research, archival research, peer-reviewed by archivists and scholars within the Vatican Archives. It was awesome. It was awesome. I got to take courses in Renaissance era paleography. I got to understand how, letters are written back in these days, and what form of Latin they were using, and what form of Proto-Italian that they were using, what dialect were they blending with Latin, how did they have to write to the Pope, how did they have to write in order to get grants to get things done, because there is so much information, I'll go on a fucking rambling spree. I already hit the 1 minute mark. It's a scholarly whatever. And so many people don't realize they were their own government and are their own government, but they were the government of Rome and the entire Catholic world. So they had their own administration that kept this many people live in this place. This is the census from this year, because we need to keep tabs on how many people are over here, because if we have enough Catholics over here, this isn't it. All of this plays into, heavy administration documentation. And what can we learn from that? You know what I mean? What can we learn from things that weren't meant to be published 600 years ago? But what are the avenues that this opens up? And it touched on, think about it. There was not an aspect of life really in most of Europe that did not revolve 100% around the Catholic Church at all times. And then the Americas, and then, you know what I mean? It is a I keep saying it's mind-boggling the amount of information they have. But imagine, okay, you're the Pope. Hello, I'm the Pope. So I'm here. I have my 12 cardinals, my homies, and then they each have like a staff that they run, like, like cabinet members, right? So it's a bureaucracy. How much, physical information does the US government have that just is piles of paperwork that are record? You know what I mean? Like, it's the same. It's and they've been around for how many hundreds of years? It's mind-boggling. It is mind-boggling. And we also don't know how much was there before around the 1400s when they really unified an archives and solidified an archives. Shit's just everywhere. It's just everywhere. It's just information, millions. Well, we can actually say that because I accidentally wandered into a papal mass. So this time, this is Papa Francesco, by the way. This is the one that's now. Good question. So papal mass is just a mass where the Pope is in attendance, and I would have been to one of those ever because I'm from Bumblefuck, and I'd never been to the Vatican. And the reason I wandered in was because I had flown in like on Friday night, and then like I had jet lag. I slept all Saturday, and I woke up thinking it was Saturday. And so I went to St. Peter's Basilica because I was like, okay, well, this is my first real day here. I'll go. I did not realize it was a Sunday. And this was like after Christmas. This was like January 20th, around that, like early January 20 something. And then, yeah, he was like, hey, they were like, hey, here comes the Pope. And I was like, oh my God, crazy. And I hadn't been to mass in years, okay? Like, not, and I wanted to go to the Basilica because I just wanted to tour because it's like a museum as well. Like, I wanted to see sculptures and things, and I did not know it was a Sunday. That was a very happy little accident. That was very fun. Yeah, crazy, right? I was genuinely in shock and awe the entire time I was there. To this day, it feels made up. It feels fake. Every single time I tell a story about it, I feel like I sound like I'm making it up. It was remarkable. And I need you guys to like understand and know, like, as a little kid, like, back when we only had like the dial-up internet access, and I was fucking reading books like crazy. We used to spend our summers at the library. They used to do like a lot of programs for free for like kids to go and do, and we loved them. And so I always felt like really cool and safe and taken care of in spaces like museums and libraries and things like that. I always felt like, because I was a very inquisitive kid, nobody ever got annoyed with me asking questions. And like, that does kind of get to you. Like, and I'm annoying and I'll just keep asking. That's enough right now. Okay, well, you didn't answer my question, and I can't really go to the next thing until I kind of figure it out. So to be around people who are everybody's like that, everybody has that inquisitive, like, hey, we're all here because we're so excited about history. Like, even the worst, shittiest parts of history, like, I got to see like the cloak of like a Spanish Inquisitor. Like, it is, as a human being, to know these things have happened, right? It 1,000 years ago this happened. Okay, that means nothing to me. But to go and like see it, like, this is a painting from 1,000 years ago, and it's right in front of me, and I'm like, oh wow, there is an energy that, like, it was too much to take in. I was there for a week. I could have been there for 15 years and not seen everything. There were archivists, one of the priests who's the Don of the whatever of a certain part of the archives. He was like, I've worked here 40 years and I've never seen everything. He's like, I could live by my whole life working here every day and not see everything. That's what's really fascinating to me. That is really, really rewarding to know that, like, I get to work with stuff, and maybe people may not have seen this stuff for like 1,000 years, and I can kind of bring it forward and say, hey, we found this. This is what it is. What can we learn from it? What can we do to make our lives better? What can we do to make everybody's lives better by knowing this history, by viewing this, by retaining it in a way that we can now, by sharing it in a way we can now? It was really huge. And I kind of get ahead of myself sometimes, and I want to like tell everyone everything all the time, and it's really exciting to know that like I picked this career for myself. I busted my ass to get to where I want to be, and I'm doing things that I'm very proud of and very excited to share. So that's really, really satisfying and fulfilling. But I could do it every single day for a million years and still want to learn more stuff. I would go back any day of the week. If they could call me today and they could be like, "Do you want to come for a few days?" Yeah, I do. I don't know if I could ever, not to say I don't know if I could ever work there. It's hard to up and move. It was really hard to up and move here for this job, which was great and I loved it. If I get to a point in my life where I'm like financially stable, hell yeah, anytime. And I would really like to, especially like from a researcher standpoint, now that I've gone and now that I like understand how like the cataloging works and how like they're, like how everything is run, it would be like significantly easier for me to go and say like, hey, I need to research XYZ. Now I have like a base foundation. They invited us back, like it, this was like through a institute, like a university, and I would go back any day of the week. It was really great. We was researching and preserving the Cajun history when we went to the Vatican archives, chat. I swear to God, like it was such a big scale to be able to like talk about our ancestors and the hell that they went through, and learn more about them just through like something that was so essential to their culture, like the Catholic religion, and like how it was expressed in a in a diasporic way, really, the way it combined and syncretized with other indigenous and African spiritual practices, and how important that was to them, that folk Catholicism, and like kind of how we talk about folk Catholicism, like different spiritual practices in Mexico and Italy, like how it differently in small areas is practiced, and it was really interesting and really fulfilling to be able to be a part of, like, even being around those original records. It was crazy. I had diplomatic immunity when I was there, which was like pretty cool. Oh yeah, did I tell you guys about this? It was actually pretty cool. So when I went and I studied at the Vatican, when we went in there as scholars, like underneath, like the whatever institution we went with, they were like, "Yep, we'll just do your security screening. Just come on in. So while you're here, you actually do have diplomatic immunity, and like you can't be charged with any crime." And I was like, finally, I can commit all the ones I want to. And I said it out loud because I don't have impulse control. And I was like, "Oh, please, please, God, let someone laugh." And then they did laugh. And I was like, okay, phew. It's been a good 20 years since I did it, but let me see if I can still read it. Ave Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te. Io sei benedetta fra le donne, e benedetto il frutto del tuo seno, Gesù. Santa Maria, Madre di Dio, prega per noi peccatori adesso e nell'ora della nostra morte. In the nome del Padre, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. This is a very good question. So basically, most of the documents there are either going to be in Latin or some subset of Italian dialects, right? But it's not the Italian we think of today, because at the time, Italy wasn't unified till 1871. So these were all individual states, right? Like Venice, you would speak very differently than you would in Rome, than you would in Naples, and then Sicily was not yet part of Italy. So all these things are coming from all these different places. And also on top of that, these documents range from like the 1200s to like the 1700s and on and so forth. So when you're thinking about that, it's not only like, do I understand Italian? I understand some modern Italian, not as much as I'd like, but I studied it. I could not sit there and read like a document that a Venetian nobleman wrote to the Pope in 1500. The way that what was interesting to me, so paleography is the study of how they wrote, back in the gap. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was even the way they kept time was different back then, right? So like it was not like the 24 hour, you know what I mean? Like they would start their day, you know, when the sun rose, that's 1 o'clock, right? Say the sun rises 7 a.m., that's 1 o'clock. So if they said, meet me at 3 o'clock, it is not the 3 p.m. we think of. That would be, depending on the time the sun rose, if it rose at 7, 8, 9, 10. So it'd be 10 a.m. And this also is important for historical documentation because to put them in the right place at the right time to confirm this is a genuine document, this is not a forgery, this is not, you know, anything like that, I have to know if this member of the Medici family was in this location on this day at this time to corroborate other parts of the archives. It all weaves into each other. It'd be like, say like you took a page out of my diary from 8th grade and you were trying to say like, oh, Alexis wrote this in 2024. I did not, because I was not in 8th grade in 2024. So, you know, and the way that I would write and phrase things would change over time. This is a microcosm of that, right? The way I would speak about myself, the way I would phrase things, the way that I would discuss what's going on in my life is going to be very different if I wrote it 10 years ago to today. You know what I mean? So when we're talking about that, there are unimaginable levels to these things. So like one person cannot know all of this, right? That's why you have so many different archivists. You have archivists, who are like in charge of certain parts of history. Like this person may be like, yes, my proficiency is in like, you know, from the beginning of, you know, 100 AD through 500 AD. Anything after that, you're going to have to find a different professional who has a different, you know, subsection of like particular expertise. So it is, I mean, it's fascinating the amount of layers that you get with this. But again, like what a dream that would fucking be, right? Like, and just me as a geek by myself, everything I learned and know from like Renaissance era Italian history, that is only a crumb. That is a not even, and like I'm autistic. I am a savant. I'm not I'm not joking. Like I have a great memory for things that I want to remember. I don't have a crumb of the qualifications that most of these people have. You know what I mean? Like it's, the seriousness of it can't really be overstated because again, you're like I mentioned in another video, like there are documents written in Chinese from China in like the year 1000 written back to the Pope, right? I can't read China, and I also like what subsection of China was it written in Mandarin? This is 1,000 years ago. What kind of cultural context do I need to know? Where was this person? What time? Like, you know, there's so much. But it's easy to get yourself overwhelmed. But like for me, I know what portions of history that I am well versed in, and I would not consider myself an expert on anything that I have not really, really, really gone in and put the focus on. And then again, I don't have a PhD. So, you know, any expertise that I do have is not as, you know what I mean? Like you have to have certain training in certain things. And yes, I'm trained in handling antique documents and things like that. But like, I am just one person, you know what I mean? And this has been like my whole life's work, essentially. I mean, even as a kid, like just I would read any book I could get my hands on. And I think that is that's huge to you know, if you have the passion for it, fucking do it. There's so much to learn. I never want to learn everything. I always want there to be more to learn, and that's one of the coolest things about this profession, I think. So my mother-in-law got me a book about the Vatican archives for Christmas, and I got around to reading it, and I bookmarked a few pages that I want to read to you guys, so I'll get back to you. Hi, look what I found. I found my book about spooky stuff and the gilded bones in the Vatican, not even just in the archives, just in the Vatican. And this is a book called Heavenly Bodies, Cult Treasures, and Spectacular Saints from the Catacombs, and it's by Paul who is actually a really fantastic photographer. I'll just like even open it briefly just so you can see like the photography in this is insane. But here's what we're talking about. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself. Excuse me. Let me set up a proper frame. So this is what the book looks like, and this is basically he's a writer as well, and he wrote like really great pieces about it. But when I say like, these are bones of like saints and stuff. Who is this? Is this Saint Magnus Pages? Saint Auxilius? Can't spell that. But yeah, so there's like, you see this netting around the bones, so it just like nylon netting almost, just to keep everything in place, because it's not, like nothing's gonna rot, obviously, because there's nothing left to rot, and this is gross, but like this whole thing's gonna be gross, so if you're not a fan, like this one, skip it, it's all good, pal. But then you see the jewels on the top, like these are encased in like just like delicate fabric and like needlework. And okay, so here is Hyacinthus was one of many generic names given to relics of an unknown provenance. This fully articulated example is in an enclosure in Germany. Dude, like that's a whole body. Like that's a whole body. You remember I said I'm doing a shit ton of research on the Vatican archives and how it relates to my family and blah, whatever. I found the letter that they showed me when I was in the secret Vatican archives. It's a letter that Michelangelo wrote to the Pope on my birthday, talking about how aggravated he is that he's not getting paid enough and that he's too famous and that he's 27. He can just leave whenever he wants and he's got enough money. He said, I could be my own Pope. Okay, T. There's no one here, save for scattered priests, nuns of various orders, and the odd hidden security guard. I am alone in St. Peter's Basilica. It's late January, and the holiday crowds have filed out, and the Easter crowds have not yet filed in. I haven't been in a church in years, but here in the sprawling vastness of Vatican City's crown jewel, where I am completely alone, it feels like it's the right place to be. I stare up at the ceiling agape, standing in the center of the church under the massive dome. I have studied every inch of this place on my own, read every book and floor plan on how it was undertaken, and I thought I was prepared. I can know the basilica's size, 247,000 square feet, how long it took to complete, 120 years, and whatever other technicalities that'll earn me a spot on Jeopardy eventually. 91 popes are buried underneath the basilica, all the paintings inside are actually mosaics, Bernini and Michelangelo hated each other, etc., etc. But here, to be here and really be here in the silence with the smells of holy water and ancient marble and lingering incense, I begin to feel the spirit of all my ancestors who came before me. The women who were forced to never speak, let alone travel in the pursuit of knowledge. I feel each one of them, nestling in my heart. My Sicilian grandmothers, my Cajun grandmothers, my Creole grandmothers, my Irish grandmothers, my native grandmothers, my African grandmothers, my grandmothers who I have never even dreamed of knowing. They're here. I take a deep breath and I look around. I'm completely alone again. And I freeze when I notice where I am. Just across from me, just beneath my feet, rests the tomb of St. Peter. A simple wooden kneeler faces the elaborate altar, emblazoned with rows of candles and a spiraling staircase that descends into the depths of the crypts below. It's painfully humble looking, one single wooden kneeler before the grave of the first pope. I suddenly remember my ancestors, both Catholic and not, lighting candles for me before I was born. They might have placed the visage of the Virgin Mary everywhere so they could protect their homes. And despite having nothing, they were brilliantly rich in spirit. I imagine my first grandmother to come to Louisiana. I imagine her fear bringing a baby on a refugee ship to flee an ethnic cleansing and praying to whatever God she prayed to that her child survived. I imagine her in the first church she stepped foot in Cajun country. I imagine not Catholicism as I know it now, but the folk Catholicism she practiced. I imagine the way she might pray to St. Peter to protect her at the crossroads of the unknown. Perhaps at the same sort of simple wooden kneeler, maybe carved from a cypress tree grown along the swamp she made a home in. I look at the elaborate tomb and then back to the kneeler. I feel shivers rack my body She's here, she's with me, and I can hand deliver her prayer. I fall to my knees and weep, unashamed, unabashed, unafraid. I am alone.